Member? Have you guys watched those episodes of South Park with the Memberberries? Well, it's gonna make sense soon. So, in the video that I made about Etruscan religion, I mentioned how the Etruscan religion kind of ended up influencing second or third hand Wicca. So I'm gonna talk about that today, but I think I'm gonna explain a lot more than you think in this video. Does that make sense? Okay, let's get started. Giacomo made me very angry this morning, and we've been like fighting for the last half an hour, and we're gonna get back to the fighting after lunch. So, all right, so before I tell you about this book, The Gospel of the Witches, which some of you had very strong opinions about in the comments. By the way, thank you, because those opinions led me to discover a scholar, which is amazing, who is called Angela Pucco. And it was interesting because when I actually watched the video that you recommended, I don't know if you actually watched the video, I feel, because she's saying the same things that I said, but thank you for recommending her, because very, very interesting. But before we talk about it specifically about this book, we kind of have to create a setting, okay? So, the setting is, let's go back in time a little bit, 1700s, Enlightenment, Industrial Revolution. So science and progress. So there's this kind of a feeling that science is bringing forth this progress, and a lot of people are kind of like, well, this is fantastic. This is gonna, be able to, if we just apply our brains and our thinking, we can create a better world for everyone. And this is gonna all come about thanks to reasoning and science, okay? And this is what brings forth, all these big inventions and all this kind of scientific discoveries. And so this is amazing, fantastic. We're all happy about that. However, this also creates a kind of a reaction in many ways. This is very interesting to me, by the way, the whole concept of how reason is great, but we also have another side of the brain which also needs to be fed, another side of us. So this book here, Religion, by, I feel like I've mentioned her a few times now. So Karen Armstrong, she's my new girl crush, okay? So Karen Armstrong explains this very well in this book, but this is something that she talks about a lot, is how there is the logos, so our reason, and then there is this other part of us which also needs to be nurtured, which is the more spiritual side, and a part of us which searches for religion, searches for spirituality, searches for essentially transcendence, okay? So I'm going to be getting philosophical today, all right? But I'm going to back it up with some like tangible information if you just bear with me, okay? So this part of us which kind of searches for transcendence is the reason why even in moments like Enlightenment, or in other moments in which we feel like we are going so far ahead with reason and with science, there is another part of us which still holds on to religion and to spirituality, okay? Okay, what I'm trying to say is that, I need a chamomile. What I'm trying to say is that the Enlightenment is very much about reason and intellect and getting rid of superstition, of monarchies, and here's my chamomile. But as Karen Armstrong explains very well in her book, Religion, there is another side of us that needs to come out. As Karen Armstrong explains very well in her book, everything which is being celebrated with the era of science and of reason is all very well, but there is another part of us which is the emotional side, which is the romantic side, which is the part of us which is looking for something which is unexplainable, the part of us which is looking for transcendence, which also needs to be nurtured and cannot be stumped out by reason. And you can really see it in other currents which are kind of a reaction to the era of Enlightenment, such as, for example, Romanticism. Romanticism is the heart's rebellion against intellect. Okay, it is celebrating our personal experience versus the public experience. It is celebrating feelings over rational thinking. Okay, and we really see this in the arts because, of course, the arts are where this part of us takes refuge when everything else is permeated by science and reason. Okay, so from an artistic point of view, in fact, we also have the pre-Raphaelites, which are depicting scenes of everyday life, a life which is celebrated as being a better life, which is the one of the rural people, the poor people living in the countryside. You have to think also that the Industrial Revolution is creating a city which kind of sucks, to be honest, right? Because imagine these black cities of the Industrial Revolution are probably not very nice places to live. So people start to really idealize nature. This is another very important element of Romanticism and of the currents of this period. Also of Transcendentalism, which is a philosophy which starts during this period in the US, which kind of depict nature as this kind of a place that where we can seek refuge from all this kind of very rigid society which is starting to take shape, and that can also feed this need for transcendence that we have within us. Okay, you have to think that there is not only a disappointment towards science, there is also a disappointment towards religion and the status quo that the religious kind of institutions bring. Okay, because science can't satisfy this need that we have, but also traditional religions can't satisfy this. Okay, you can see this also in literature. Think of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Okay, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein really shows this kind of like almost gruesome kind of direction that we take when we let science take over. Okay, and when we create something so monstrous as something which is only dictated by science. Okay. Another buddy of Mary Shelley is, for example, Byron, who is a great example of poetry from this time, in which we are kind of researching a totally different sphere than what is being researched by scholars and by scientists of the time. Does this make sense? I hope it does. The reason why we are so obsessed with the past and the rural lifestyle is that there is this idea that human beings, their purity has been corrupted. Okay, and this is actually an element of the transcendentalism, the philosophy that I was telling you about, that it also has this idea of the purity of the human being as something that then gets corrupted by the institutions. Interestingly, for transcendentalists, some of the institutions which are most corrupting for human beings is the Catholic Church and the organized religions. Rural life, nature. Also, we start to have an interest and an obsession with the past, because the past is a time before now when we lived better. Memberberries, like the Memberberries from South Park, when we sing of the good old days when things were better. And in fact, the pre-Raphaelites often depict scenes from literature, from Dante Alighieri, for example. And the past which people are specifically interested in is the Middle Ages. So, for example, from an architectural standpoint, during this period, we have the Gothic revival architecture. We have that a lot in Italy as well. Like literally the facade of the Duomo of Florence is neo-Gothic, okay? We have a lot of it in the UK as well. Also in America, in the US, we have a lot of architecture which is inspired from Gothic architecture from the Middle Ages. We also think of the Middle Ages as being, the past when things worked better and we were just happier from many points of view. So there's this kind of fascination with the past. This interest in searching for anything that can give us a deeper meaning doesn't only go towards the past, sometimes it goes also abroad, okay? So since we are in the West, everything is so much about science and reason, we try to look towards other places where we can find something that gives us a little bit more meaning from a transcendent point of view. So in architecture, there is the fascination with the Middle East and with India. You have to think that a lot of people are traveling to the colonies from the UK, and so they bring back this kind of influence in the form of architecture. So for example, the pavilion in England, which is inspired by Indian, or maybe it wasn't, maybe it was Middle Eastern architecture. So we have in architecture Orientalism. We also have a fascination with Egypt. So we have a lot of Egyptian influence in the architecture that you find in Europe. And this influence also comes into the spiritual interests of the time. So we start to have a lot of interest towards kind of Oriental lifestyles and Oriental religions. This is going to become very important in a moment, okay? There's also interest towards the Jewish religion and the kind of the Jewish culture in many ways as well. So, for example, interest in reading about the Kabbalah, which is the more esoteric side of Judaism. So basically, we are looking for the sublime. We are looking for the ineffable. We are looking for things which can't be put into words so easily and that can't be rationalized so easily. During this period, we have the advent of spiritualism. Spiritualism was this belief for which you could contact people from the afterlife. You have to think that a lot of the things which religion took care of, which was basically reassuring us about the afterlife and the people that have passed away in our lives, people were kind of not believing so much in the standard religions anymore. Not everyone, but there was a lot of people that just were not satisfied with what the churches of the time had to give, the institutional churches had to give. So they were looking for something different, and this is where spiritualism comes in. A lot of spiritualists were obviously fakes. I think they were probably all fakes, but a lot of them were actually women, and it was a way for women to find a kind of a direction as something that, a lot of spiritualists were also great feminists, and I don't want to make this sound weird, but it's just a fact that spiritualism and the suffragist movement and feminism are very closely connected. There is actually a really cool series which is based on a book by the girl, you know, the woman that wrote, what's the name of the woman that wrote The Handmaid's Tale? There's a great book that talks about this, Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, which is the same one that wrote The Handmaid's Tale. And also Alias Grace was made into a mini-series, as was The Handmaid's Tale. So watch it. I didn't read the book, I watched the series, but it was really good. And there's also this kind of, this idea that by pretending to channel a spirit, women were able to say things that otherwise they would not be able to say normally. But anyway, I digress a lot. I'll digress a lot during this episode, I feel. So, but I'm very excited about this episode. It's probably, that's why I need to drink some chamomile. So, spiritualism, we also have other forms of spirituality, alternative forms of spirituality, which are presented during this period because of this kind of disappointment with traditional religion, but the need of a search for something in its place, okay? Enter these new kind of orders such as the Theosophic order. Madame Blavatsky was quite a character. Maybe we can talk about her specifically and this organization, which is still active today, in another episode. So Madame Blavatsky starts this Theosophic order, which is basically a group of people which are wanting to search for truth in a spiritual way, but without letting go of science totally. And they are very much inspired by all religions and a lot by Oriental philosophies as well. I'm not going to go deep into this because there's so much to say, but it's very interesting. Then we have the Order of the Golden Dawn, which again is kind of like a research for truth. They are these, it's basically we have a lot of 19th century occultists and kind of esoteric writers and just people which are looking for truth in a more of an esoteric way. And there's a lot of these orders which practice ritual magic and are esoteric in the sense that you kind of have to be initiated to enter these orders and to be initiated to practices. Often there's a lot of meditation involved as well, which can bring you closer to a truth and to a better spiritual way of living. Okay. Aleister Crowley is a typical character from this period, which has often been defined as like the most evil man of all time, but he was basically like researching, contacting demons and stuff like that, but not in the way that, like, in a particularly satanic way. It was just literally being spiritual in a very different way. Okay, so this is where it all begins. Okay, another thing which is becoming important during this period is interest in folklore. So these are the years in which folklore really becomes its own subject matter. Okay, this is very important, especially in Germany, where after that Germany had been taken over by Napoleon, they kind of their reaction to this afterwards is trying to create their own nation. And to create their own nation, they are very much looking towards folklore and the ways, the unwritten ways of the people, the folk, to kind of define what their nation is. And this is where we can really see the dangers of memberberries. So if you've seen South Park, you know what I'm talking about. Often, and we kind of, memberberries are about what's happening today in our day, when we are looking towards the good old days, the past, to define us, and this is often used by nationalists as well. So there is a bit of a danger in this kind of interest for folklore, interest for the past. I'm not saying it's an inherent danger, but it often takes a kind of a nationalist direction, which can become dangerous. And in fact, we see it here because this neo-pagan interest is also taken on by, for example, the Nazis. So one of the heads of the SS, I can't remember his name, but he was a dick. So he was actually very interested in paganism. He was very interested in herbal remedies, for example. And he is the one which will give the Nazis this Aryan's trajectory. So he becomes interested in Aryans, which were, it was a pagan religion which had nothing to do with the Germans anyway, but he decides that the Germans are basically inheriting the ways of the pagans of the past, which were the Aryans. And so it kind of he goes down that rabbit hole, which is gross and we don't want to go down that, but it is connected to this. So on one side we have this kind of occultism, which is very much hierarchical and organized. We also have an interested in folk and in folklore and in old traditions. And so not only in the past of the Middle Ages, but also because we are disappointed with the Catholic religion, we kind of try to look to before the Catholic religion, and we start to be interested in the pagan times. And we just talked about how that can take a very kind of a horrible trajectory with nationalism and so forth. But there isn't only that, there is also using it as a form of criticism towards the status quo in a very almost socialist manner and revolutionary manner. And this is where in 1862 a book comes out by Jules Michelet, a French historian, and it's called Les Sorcières. This is the first time in which witches are portrayed and are described in a way which is positive, okay? Very interesting if you want to know more about the depiction and the representation of witches throughout history, and if you want to read about this in a very kind of detailed and factual way, I recommend you read this book, which has been amazing for me. It's called Waking the Witch, and it's by Pam Grossman, which I feel she is one of the most important experts on the iconography and the figure of the witch through history and through media. It's definitely her. And this book is a very easy read, which really just very factual. I love this book. I definitely recommend it. So in the book Le Sorcière, Le Sorciero, basically the sorceress, the witch, we have this first depiction of the witch in a positive manner, and what he is saying is most certainly wrong. So it's probably wrong what he's saying from a historical standpoint, but still it ends up being very, very influential. He is saying that the women that were burned during the witch trials, the 16th century and 17th century witch trials, the big, it was the witch trials, right? You call that in English. What he's saying is that all those witches that were burnt during the 16th and 17th century in Europe, all those women that were burnt as witches, were not women who were not witches at all and just were burnt for a number of reasons. And I would love to talk about this more in detail in another video. I keep saying that I'm going to make a video about this. It's just that there's so much to say in that video, so we will get to that. But he's saying that maybe these women were not Satan worshippers, as the church that burnt them said, but they were not just regular women either. Maybe they were women who were effectively worshipping ancient gods and who were followers of what he defines the old religion. And he says maybe, just maybe, this pagan religion that was practiced before the advent of Christianity has secretly been practiced for centuries, unbeknownst to the public and unbeknownst to the Catholic Church. And then they were discovered and they were burnt for practicing this old religion. So he depicts them as these wonderful, cunning women that basically rebelled against the Catholic Church and continues this pagan religion from the past. And this is probably not true, okay, as far as most scholars say, but it's important that he says this because this kind of plants the seed in the minds of many people of the time of, oh, maybe there's this pagan religion of the past which is still present. And so we start to have a lot of people which are researching in and using the folklore as a kind of form of researching among the people this pagan religion which is hiding in the kitchens of the folk that's living in the countryside. Okay, does that make sense? Which is a very romantic idea, very fitting with what people are looking for in the time, right? It fits everything that we've been saying. It fits the attachment to nature. It fits the want to go back in history. It fits the fact of wanting to find another form of religion which is different from the Catholic religion. And it fits this fascination with the folk, with the people that are living in the countryside and having a different kind of lifestyle. So it kind of fits all of these elements, all right? And this is where Charles Leland comes into play. Charles Leland, which is originally from the US, he travels a lot. He comes to Europe various times. First, he goes to the UK and he researches gypsies and their culture, and he writes many books about this. He's a folklorist. He investigates everything about folklore. I need to say straight away that we know for a fact that he's a little bit like Giorgio Vasari that I mentioned in another video. He's one that will not sacrifice a good story for the sake of truth. Okay, so there's a lot of made up in what he publishes. Okay, he then comes to Italy and then he writes a lot of papers on the Etruscan religion, and he becomes very, very interested and fascinated on the Etruscans. Remember that the Etruscans are the pagans of the pagans, in the sense that even for the Romans, which were pagans themselves, they were considered to be even more magical and even more superstitious. And even the Romans themselves viewed the Etruscans as being more superstitious than them, more magical than them, and more religious and spiritual than them. Okay, so as he is researching, I think he finds in the Etruscans this ideal, perfect example of the pagan way of life, the pagan lifestyle, the pagan spirituality that he's looking for. Okay, he then comes up with a book which he says, so basically he says that he meets this woman called a witch in central Italy that comes from Volterra, and she calls herself Maddalena. Maddalena, who apparently her real name was Margherita Telani, apparently tells him about this old religion which has been practiced by people, and that it's just been carried through from the pagan times up until the day in which he's writing. So we're at the end of the 18th century, of the 1800s, remember. So, and she tells him, she initiates him apparently to this religion as well. And she talks to him about this manuscript, and he asks her to get him this manuscript which has everything put inside there of how to practice this religion, basically. And finally he says that she presents him with this manuscript, and that the manuscript has never been found, the manuscript in Italian, and he translates it and then publishes it as the Gospel of the Witches. Okay, now obviously, what is in this gospel? There's many incantations and spells, and there's also the description of this Aradia. This is important because in this book, it is said that Lucifer and Diana, the goddess Diana, the pagan goddess, Artemis, she's the Roman version of Artemis, right? So Diana and Lucifer, who are brother and sister, moon and sun, okay, they together they have a child, and that child is Aradia. Now Aradia is the witch of the witches, the queen of the witches, who is sent on earth to save people from basically by teaching them witchcraft and magic. She saves the poor, the underdogs, and teaches them magic so that they can rebel against the authority. Okay, this is interesting because she's almost like a witchy version of Jesus, because she's sent to save the people by teaching, only that rather than teaching them to turn the other cheek, she teaches them to rebel and to use magic to rebel. So this is very much in the concept of, you know, these pagans which are fighting against the Catholic Church and fighting against the status quo, okay? You have to think that Leyland is a bit of a rebel himself. He actually, in France, I forgot to tell you, he went to France and fought in the French Revolution, okay? And there is where he met a very important figurehead of the occultism of that time, who has been extremely influential, Eliphas Levi. And he was he was very influential on bringing like the Kabbalah and esoteric Judaism, and bringing that influence to the occultism of the time. Just to give you an idea, if you've ever seen tarot cards, the main two famous sets of tarot cards that we have, that you see, are the ones which are the ones of Marseille, which originate from the Renaissance period, and the ones which were drawn during the 19th century. And a lot of the influence of the subject matter in there has been described as being coming from Eliphas Levi. Okay, and they were drawn by an amazing woman, and who was told what to put in there by another man. We won't go into that. Maybe if you're interested in this subject matter, we can talk about the history of tarot cards in another episode. But so he is connected with a lot of the influential occultists of the time. And so in this book, he puts all this subject matter, and what a lot of scholars have pointed out, so most scholars agree that this book is mostly full of BS, in the sense that, what I mean is that they all agree that there was not an old religion that was being unitedly worshipped by a load of people throughout Italy, and that there is this kind of cohesive old pagan religion, which very well defined in a book that has been then transmitted by him. We all agree that that is BS. Okay, different scholars have different ideas about how much of truth there is in there, because the fact of it being all cohesive in a book, I think we all agree is BS, but we don't all agree on whether it's entirely BS what's in there. Okay, some people believe that it's a mix of the two, so that it could be that she existed and then she kind of convinced him that there was something that she was going to present him with, and then she never did, and so he made it up. So it could be a mixture of all of this. It is definitely interesting how it's very Christian influenced. Okay, so Diana is the only pagan goddess which appears in the New Testament, because at one point Paul is trying to bring Christianity, and he encounters resistance when he goes to a Greek island, and the locals are worshipping Diana, and so they push back against him, and so that's why Diana is mentioned. Lucifer is definitely a biblical character. Also, this concept of Aradia coming to save the people, you know, a daughter of God's coming to save the people, that's very Christian, right? This Messiah kind of figure, all right? So definitely very influenced by Christianity. And I feel that this whole concept of needing to find a cohesive religion which is all contained in a book, that's also very kind of it's very kind of this monotheistic idea that we need this big book that has everything written in there since the beginning of times, right? Whereas pagan religions of the past, we saw how the Etruscans themselves didn't even have the need of representing their gods until they encountered the Greeks, right? So this obsession with defining things and putting them into words and having them written down, I feel that Leyland and other people like him did fall into the trap of wanting to find a pagan religion and finding something different, some kind of different spirituality, but then needing it to be like Catholicism, to be like these other monotheistic religions which are so divine and written down and everything, that telling you exactly how you need to do it. Okay, but this is my personal opinion of often, like, and I feel that this goes back a lot to what Karen says about how we want something transcendental, we want something ineffable, undescribable, and then we fall into the trap of wanting to describe it, of wanting to define it so much and wanting to fit it into a box. Okay, so I feel that that's what's happening there. He's so much wanting to find this rebellious, this feminist, this kind of witchy religion which can be fulfilling all these needs, but then falls into the trap of needing it to be presented in a scripture. Okay, so the book has a very hard time being published, obviously, and has very clear reference to the Etruscans. It has a lot of, it comes out with pictures that he does himself, which are clearly taken by the Etruscans, from the Etruscans. We mentioned this in another video. So clear connection to the Etruscans, and clear connection also to this concept of witchery and of the witch in basically encompassing the rebel, the perfect rebel of paganism, of coming from the past to rebel against the status quo. So she is, in a nutshell, everything that we're looking for if you are Leyland and if you are many people of this time. Okay, now years go by, and then another very influential book comes out. In 1921, Margaret Murray publishes a book called and again, this is presented as fact and as anthropology, as history. She publishes The Witch Cult in Western Europe. This book, again, many parts of it have been debunked. Okay, this is very important because although this has been a lot of it has been debunked, it's still very influential. Okay, she writes about how this religion, this old religion, has been worshipped and has been continued, and she also talks about the witch trials and of how about, and she kind of defines what this cult, what this religion looked like. Oh, by the way, very important, it's in this book, in the Gospel of the Witches, that we first encounter the concept that witches meet every full moon. Okay, in Murray we encounter the concept of the Sabbaths. So very important in Wicca and in other forms of modern witchcraft, there's the concept of the Sabbaths. The Sabbaths are 8. 4 are solstices and equinoxes. And midway in between solstice and equinox and solstice and so forth, maybe we have a picture of this here, there are other 4 Sabbaths, which are festivals like Halloween is a Sabbath, for example. Okay, so they are basically divide the wheel of the year into these 8 moments, which are equinoxes, solstices, and these other ones in between, like on the 1st of May, like a lot of festivities today are, in fact, she supports this theory with the fact that a lot of important festivities, even Catholic festivities today, are inherited by pagan festivities that we know were there, that are documented, which are celebrated midway in between an equinox and a solstice. Okay, so May Day, which is Beltane, and Lupercalia, we talked about it on another video, is one of those as well. So in fact, we have it here, Lupercus. Okay, we'll talk about what this is in a moment. So she proposes this theory about the Sabbaths, which becomes very influential. So she talks about this old religion, which has been kind of continued throughout the time. So she does pose some very interesting facts, which are real, and kind of also make some theories which have been debunked, but were still incredibly influential for these religions that tend to take on some few decades later. So we have in the 60s, obviously 60s, yay, hippies, drugs, partying, hallucinogenics. So while some people are like, you know, experiencing transcendentalism in that way, we have other people which again feel the need for this religion, which a new religion, which is spiritual in a different way. And so we have the advent of Wicca. Now, Wicca, which was funded by Gerald Gardner, basically takes these ideas that are present in this book and that are present in the book of Murray that we just talked about, and he also talks about meeting this woman who initiated him to this old religion, which had been practiced by people since forever. So again, he talks about meeting a real live witch that initiates him, although many people say that probably she didn't even exist these days. He mentions who she is. It's like old Dorothy, and it has been researched who this woman actually was. However, he doesn't talk about this until after her death, so we won't really ever know if she was a witch or not. However, it is highly unlikely that there was this actual kind of cult continuing, as we said, since the beginning of times. Not beginning of times, but since pre-Christian times. Okay, but again, he's as Leyland did, saying, oh, I actually met a witch and she taught me these things, and this book that I'm presenting you with, which is a book about Wicca, it's all real stuff and it's really old stuff. So there's this idea of presenting this new pagan religion which is connected to nature and connected to all these things, which has been done forever. Okay, now Wicca will then influence other religions to branch off from it. Today we have all kinds of different kinds of witchcrafts, and the one that is definitely more important for what we're talking about today, which is Leyland, is this one. So this is the ways of the strega. Now, do you remember how we talked about looking at folklore, looking at the past to kind of reassure oneself? There's also another element to this. You have to think that, I feel that maybe some of you who are watching this can understand this even better. I find that a lot of people that are living in the US are obsessed with finding their origins in Europe and in other parts of the world, which is totally understandable, because there must be a bit of a feeling of being kind of uprooted when you live in such a new country as the US. And so it is very much a thing that US citizens are always trying to do, is connect to their origins, to where their family came from. And you know that there's a lot of Italians, Italo-Americans, people whose ancestry comes from Italy. Okay, now those people that were looking for their ancestry in Italy were the ones, not all of them obviously, but this kind of research for one's roots interconnected with this research for a new form of spirituality in the form of the stregheria. Now, Raven Grimassi, who is really the one who spread stregheria in the US, stregheria is a form of modern witchcraft which was inspired by Wicca, but extremely inspired by Leyland, because it talks about, you know, the ancestry from a witchy point of view, from a magic point of view, being in Italy. Important to say, stregheria doesn't exist in Italy. Okay, we don't have that word. Stregheria is an American phenomenon which traces its roots back to Italy through using this as a baseline. Okay. And in fact, a lot of the information which is here, you find here. Aradia, which is the protagonist of this book, you find here, okay? You find her also in Wicca too. And you find a lot of the same pictures as well that are offered by Leyland, okay? Now, obviously, it doesn't matter how much a religion goes back, even with Christianity, when certain elements of the Bible are debunked, and when you find out that a book is not written at the time in which it says it's written, whether it's the Bible, elements of the Bible, whether it's the Gospel of the Witches, whether it's anything, it doesn't matter. It matters what a religion does for you. And that is why what Karen Armstrong talks about as well. The problem is when religions become dangerous, when we want them to be literal. The most extremist forms of belief are when are often kind of advanced by people who want the word of God to be true, right? Like usually, also like I don't know if I'm going to be cancelled for saying this, but often terrorists, not always, but terrorists are often believers in a version of their religion which is extremely literal, when we should be more about going for what religion is doing for you rather than what it exactly says. You know, it should be, religion is something that is meant to make our life better and is not meant to be taken so literally. So if you believe in Christianity and you end up finding out that the Bible is not written by who you think it's written from, or maybe you even find out that Jesus didn't even exist, that's fine, as long as what Jesus did for you is good. People that used to believe in myths didn't need Zeus to be a real guy, you know. We don't need, it's metaphor. Guys, don't take it so seriously and just make it work for you in a positive way, okay? So I think that this is, Angela Pucca made a video about this very subject just recently, and after that I read this, it just bring it all together. So I just wanted to share this with you. So this is why this video has been so long, and I've kind of turned it into more of like a philosophy kind of video than history. But I just found this all very fascinating for me, and I don't know, I feel like recently a lot of information is coming together like a puzzle for me, and I wanted to share it with you all, and I hope you enjoyed it. So this was the influence of the Etruscans on occultism and on witchcraft of today. This is also a video that tells you about how in history we've often been through moments in which we look to the past and we looked to the Orient and we look to other parts of the world to look for something to give our life meaning when that meaning is taken away, because we have a spiritual side that needs to be nurtured, and it needs to be nurtured in the right way. So I hope that made sense. Does that make sense? I hope so. Have a lovely day, and remember to subscribe. I promise the next one will be shorter.